A university campus is a symbol of hope, of dreams, of plans for the future. On this beautiful campus began a journey which was to span millions of miles on the North American continent, touch tens of thousands of lives, and whose impact will be felt as far into the future as anyone can see. It has brought us to this night, when we honor the one who took that journey.
Sing no more the Perigean, where the floating cyclades shine.
It was a long trip to the University of Michigan from George's boyhood home in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, both in miles and experiences. His parents were born in the Ukraine in Eastern Europe, and at the turn of the century, fled the religious oppression then taking place. His father and mother met on the ship taking them to America, and they settled in the Berkshires, married, and with the help of his maternal grandmother, started to raise a family. George was born in a room above the grocery store his father owned, the last of 9 children. His work ethic was nurtured by this loving family. He credits his parents and 5 brothers and 3 sisters with playing the major roles in developing his character, often sacrificing their own opportunities for achievement while supporting his dreams and ambitions. Ever the fashion plate, George was also an inquisitive and studious lad. While the rolling hills of Massachusetts beckoned him to play, he still found time for his school books. George graduated from Pittsfield High School in 1940 at the age of 16. His parents thought he was too young to start college, so he entered a training program at General Electric Company. He worked for 2 years as a chemist alongside a PhD from Princeton and 9 PhDs from Michigan. Not surprisingly, George enrolled at the University of Michigan in 1942. But those were the war years, and young men found themselves in many places other than a classroom. He came home to enter the service, but his Princeton connection at GE led him to work on the Manhattan Project, the development of the atom bomb, in the chemistry department at Princeton. He was a 19-year-old chemist in the company of 12 PhDs in chemistry. It was an unbelievable opportunity, and George could have set out the war there, but all of his buddies were in the service, so he joined the Navy and served until World War II ended. George returned to Ann Arbor in 1946 to get his degree in chemistry at Michigan. It slowly dawned on him that he did not want to spend the rest of his life in a chemistry lab. There was a big, wide world out there that beckoned, and that was the laboratory he wanted to be a part of. Changing his major to business, in August of 1949, he received his Bachelor of Business Administration degree, and 9 months later, had his MBA. Like most returning veterans, George was in school primarily to learn. But he did find one other pursuit which caught his interest, and then his passion, and which was to become his life's work. In 1946, George joined Lambda Chi Alpha. He could not know, as he served in half a dozen offices in the chapter, that he was establishing a knowledge of undergraduate operations that would serve him and the fraternity well in the coming years. Early in 1950, George staged a tremendously successful Great Lakes conclave at Michigan, and this brought him to the attention of Executive Director Duke Flad. After finishing graduate school, he made the first of thousands of trips associated with the fraternity to the Lambda Chi Alpha headquarters to interview for the position of traveling secretary. The title was appropriate. George has traveled literally millions of miles for the fraternity since that first airplane ride to Indianapolis. The welcome, however, was probably not as colorful as those to come. When George joined the administrative staff, the headquarters were located at 2029 North Meridian Street, and Lambda Chi Alpha was one of the largest fraternities in the collegiate world. Increasing the staff was essential, and in 1952, he became service secretary, supervising undergraduate operations for the next 16 years. He worked with students from across the United States and Canada, further developing the unique understanding which has enabled him to lead the fraternity through decades of turmoil and progress. He was also fortunate to be in the company of other outstanding leaders of Lambda Chi Alpha, Bruce McIntosh and Duke Flad, E.J.C. Fisher, and Lynn Leitner, Houston Carnes and Tozier Brown, Lou Plourde, and Dr. Ghali, men of vision and incredible talent. They were his mentors, his colleagues, and his inspiration. With his innate modesty, George has said, "If I appear tall, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants." The 1950s were basically years of quiet, steady, qualitative growth. George refers to them as the fabulous 50s. Fraternities were the unchallenged leaders on the college campus. They enjoyed a popularity that was unparalleled in their nearly 200-year history. But by the time George took over the reins as executive director in 1969, the times had changed dramatically. It would require great skill, knowledge, and understanding to see the fraternity successfully through the turbulence of the late 60s and early 70s, as a firestorm of protest swept the campuses of North America. George's long association with undergraduates prompted him to launch an idea that had been rattling around in his brain since his graduate year in college. He had seen for many years the loss of a third of the fraternity's pledges who had no interest in an archaic system which relegated them to second-class status. In the first Reflections article he ever wrote for the Crossing Crescent in November 1969, he said, "Were we not able, out of conviction and sincere belief, to speak out positively and forcefully that we believe in the value of fraternity, we could not, in good conscience, ask thousands of young men to share this experience. For indeed, who will answer when the trumpet is uncertain?" It didn't take him long to sound the trumpet in a very certain manner, with a call for equality among all fraternity members. His second Reflections article in February 1970 was titled, "Pledges, Who Needs Them?" In it he asked, "Can Lambda Chi Alpha or any fraternity get along without having pledges?" His answer was, "I submit that we not only can, but in the long run, we must." His call for an end not only to pledge terminology, but to the whole concept of pledgeship sent shockwaves through the fraternity system. It would take some fraternities nearly 20 years to accept the no-pledge concept. About a dozen chapters implemented the fraternity education program of Lambda Chi Alpha immediately. Associate members, not pledges, received a full measure of respect. The new program helped them develop their full potential in all areas of life. In 1972, the General Assembly officially adopted the program. George helped implement it by example and inspiration. George led the fraternity and other progressive programs as well. He felt the fraternity could benefit by greater student input in its programs and policies. In 1970, Lambda Chi Alpha established the Student Advisory Committee, opening its highest councils and decision-making processes to undergraduates. George has met at length with all 21 committees since then, and most of the time, he has been listening rather than talking. 4 years later, the beautiful headquarters building in Indianapolis was completed, and George and his staff moved in to begin a new era of unified leadership. George's commitment to fraternity goes far beyond Lambda Chi Alpha. He has been one of the staunchest and most articulate advocates of interfraternity cooperation. He is one of the most sought-after speakers on the interfraternity circuit. When George speaks, people listen. The awards and honors he has received from within Lambda Chi Alpha and from interfraternity groups fill several walls of his home. He is truly a shining star to so many. Indianapolis has been George's home for 40 years. Much of that time has been spent in international headquarters, writing and pondering, discussing and deciding. But once a year, Indianapolis is the scene of an event that he never misses, the Indy 500. And as George passes the torch of leadership to another, perhaps he will find a little more time for his other love, the University of Michigan. This is where he began his journey with Lambda Chi Alpha. It is where his fertile imagination and quiet introspection grew into a successful career. And this is where the Wolverines play. This is George's team. And when you're George's team, you have his fullest loyalty. Many sports teams have what is called an impact player, the one who makes the difference. George has been Lambda Chi Alpha's impact player for many years. Ask anyone who has served on the staff. He's worked with 85% of them. He never asked any of them to do anything he wouldn't do or hadn't done. Among the things they learned from him, professionalism, ethical and moral standards, unselfishness, the golden rule, do unto others. In other words, he was not just teaching them to be good professionals and managers. He was teaching them to live their lives for the benefit of others, something he learned from his oldest brother, Bill, whom he idolized. Duke Fladd once described George as quietly effective and in practice a perfectionist. He can be seen working alone at all hours and all types of places. But over the years, he has understood and encouraged the fun element of fraternity. He has been able to poke fun at himself, has never taken himself too seriously, and has never lost his sense of humor. Within the work, there must also come recreation. From Mexico to Canada, George has traveled to enjoy not just the work, but the friendship of those with whom he has worked over the years. Visit any chapter, as George has done, and you'll see the reason that we all join and why we are all here. Friendship. Wherever he goes, you will always find him surrounded by people, especially undergraduates. And he makes no apologies about the fact that he loves to hug people, another feature of his Ukrainian background. In times of tragedy, George's messages of comfort, sympathy, and compassion are among the first ones received, and he is frequently there to offer his personal support and a broad shoulder to lean on. When faced with adversity, he is guided by these words of Khalil Gibran: "If I accept the sunshine and warmth, I must also accept the thunder and lightning." George will do everything in his power to resolve a problem or a conflict, but he does not dwell on the past or worry about things that are beyond his control. Questioned about one of his rare mistakes, he would flash an impish grin and say, "It seemed like a good idea at the time." His generosity knows no bounds, and no one will ever know how many friends and brothers he has helped along the way, because those are secrets known only to himself and the recipients of his generosity. When doing a kind deed for another, he asks only one thing: that that person do a kind deed for another, and ask that that person do the same, thereby multiplying his good deed endlessly. In this, he has been influenced by the writings of Lloyd Douglas in a book which he found in a secondhand bookstore at Princeton many years ago. The philosophy of life he most fervently believes in is found in the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew. We live in a time of tarnished heroes, and sometimes we may think there are no real heroes anymore. But then a George Spasyk comes along, and our faith is restored. There is not a person here who has not been touched by him. Perhaps it can best be expressed in the words of a beautiful song, which we know means a great deal to you. It must have been cold there in the shadows, to never have sunlight in your face. You were content to let me shine. You always walked a step behind. So I was the one with all the glory, while you were the one with all the strain. Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything I would like to be. I can fly higher than an eagle, for you are the wind beneath my wings. George has said that one day he would write a book. We think he could write several based on his experiences alone. His uncanny memory of names, faces, and events is legendary. In his library at home are some 3,000 books, contemporary and classical. One of George's favorite passages is by Dostoevsky. Even if we are occupied with important things, even if we fall into misfortune, still let us remember how good it was here once, where we were all together, united by a good and kind feeling, which made us, perhaps, a little better than we were. George, we are all a lot better than we were because you came into our lives. This is not a farewell, but a temporary parting of our ways. We hope to see you often down the road. Thank you for your leadership, your support, your inspiration. Thank you for your compassion, your generosity, your faith, and your love. Thank you for being our quiet hero.
Hip hooray for dear old Lambda Chi. Let's give a hip hip hooray and shout it to the sky. We'll make the rafters ring when all the fellows sing about the cross and the crescent. It's the grandest thing. We'll shout it loud and strong. We'll shout it all day long because we want the world to know. We stand together now. We stand to win and how for dear old Lambda Chi.